So I've had lately conversations with Prime Minister Modi and President Ramaphosa. And the only conversation that we have is basically about the situation in Ukraine. And I do think that it would be good to see them more involved. For instance, President Ramaphosa, who was a good friend of President Martti Ahtisaari and a peace mediator, understands peace. India has a geopolitical stake in this, so we should get them involved in one way or another. The final point that I still want to make.
A pleasure and privilege to be here today. Now, you've just returned from Ukraine. What was the mood music there like? How did that trip go?
I think the mood music was probably better than it was a year ago. I think there's a certain feeling of probably resolve and confidence with President Zelenskyy and his administration. I had a 1 hour tete-a-tete with him in the garden, and we also had a 1 to 2 hour briefing on the security situation. So the war is in a stalemate. That is absolutely clear, but I think there's a certain sense of confidence that we might be moving in the right direction. So I came home from Kyiv a tad more optimistic than when I left.
And what sort of conversations did you have with President Zelenskyy about next steps to achieving peace?
Well, I think the sequence is still pretty much the same. So first we need a ceasefire, and then after that, can we begin peace negotiations in earnest? And the other sequence is that we probably need a date for a physical bilateral meeting between Zelenskyy and Putin. And only after that can Zelenskyy reach out to Putin by phone to discuss, what the agenda could possibly be. But I think the base case is still pretty much the same. In the meanwhile, we need to continue to ramp up the economic pressure on Russia through sanctions. And we need to continue to ramp up the military capabilities of Ukraine by providing them with all necessary defense means available.
And it's been today almost exactly 1 month since you traveled to the US with fellow European leaders and President Zelenskyy to meet Trump. What progress has been made since?
Well, I think there are two tracks that we're working on. The first one is the idea of European security arrangements or security guarantees. And on the military side, they are pretty much ready. Of course, they have been set up and crafted to a situation after the ceasefire and after the peace. And then secondly, I think there's been progress made on increasing the economic pressure on Russia. And only last week in Paris, a week and a half ago, we had a phone call with President Trump and some European leaders. And I think his tack at the time was twofold. The first one was to tell Europeans to stop buying oil and gas. I think he's absolutely right on that. And of course, there are two countries, Slovakia and Hungary, that still do that. And I think we need to increase the pressure on that. And then the second tack that he has is a thought of, okay, how can we put pressure through secondary sanctions elsewhere? And I think there the European Commission, and speaking under the authority of Henna Virkkunen here, has done a really good job in communicating with the Americans what's possible and what's not. And I think the 19th package of sanctions was just rolled out by the Commission today. So, these peace mediation negotiations, you need quite a lot of patience. Mm-hmm. There's 1 week where things go your way, and then another week when you're just sort of banging your head into the wall and thinking we're not advancing at all. So I think we're in a better place now than we were a month ago.
And how confident are you in yours and the EU's ability to win Trump over and actually achieve a ceasefire?
Well, I don't think confidence is so much the issue. It's pretty much about a process and engagement. And that means that we're in constant communication with the American administration. And of course, they have their own interests. President Trump is doing everything that he thinks is right in achieving a ceasefire or a peace agreement. And we Europeans need to work closely with the United States in doing that. One day we feel that things are going in the right direction. At other days, there's a little bit of a stalemate. And of course now the latest developments and public statements that we see coming out from President Trump during his state visit in the UK, in my mind, are nudging things in the right direction.
And why do you think Trump is so keen to almost back Russian positions by giving Putin more time?
Well, I don't think I'm the right person to comment on that. I think Trump is very persuasive in what he does, as we can see. He has been involved in negotiating a settlement between Azerbaijan and Armenia and others, and we'll see. So I'm hopeful that we'll get there, and we never underestimate the capacity of the President of the United States to negotiate peace agreements.
This week, we've seen a lot of news about drones in Poland. Why do you think Russia is doing that?
I think Russia is testing us. You could say that they test us on many different ways, hybrid or otherwise. They test us on land, for instance, by instrumentalizing asylum seekers, as we have seen over the past few years. They test us in the sea by cutting cables. And now they test us in the air with drones. And it's always a gray zone, attribution, not attribution, purpose, not purpose. And they want to see our reaction. So, for instance, when I spoke with President Zelenskyy, it was quite clear that the judgment of the Ukrainians of this particular drone attack was that this was a way to, first of all, test the resolve of the alliance. We can be in Article 4, invoked Article 4 of NATO, and then secure, and the Secretary General of NATO decided to put forth an Eastern sentry. And I think the response was quite good, but at the same time was probably an attempt to message to Ukraine's Western allies that perhaps you should take care of your own air defense first. So, they test us all the time, and I think the key point also to understanding of the testing is the information war we see ongoing every day. And that's why I think it's very important that the security community, and to a certain extent also, the free and open media, that you use judgment on what kind of instruments you use from this information war, so it doesn't play into the hands of the Russians. So a lot of testing coming up in the next few weeks for sure.
In Kiev, you spoke about collaborating with the Ukrainians on drone defenses. Can you talk a bit about what that looks like?
Yeah, I think what we have to understand throughout this war, and for understandable reasons, I think a lot of people have felt that this is just a one-way street. So, we provide Ukraine with military and financial assistance. That's it. But as a matter of fact, what we have to understand now is two things. The first one is that Ukraine has not only the largest, but the most modern and experienced army in Europe, 800,000 men and women. And secondly, their military capability right now in modern warfare is a notch above ours. So that means that, for instance, on air defense, we have a lot to learn on drones, drone defense systems, what kind of missiles are useful where. So, I'm sure that a lot of European states, including Finland, will be doing close cooperation on drones. But on that side, right now, I feel that it's the Ukrainians teaching us rather than the other way around.
So what have you learned? I mean, if it's happening in Poland, it's not inconceivable that it would happen in Finland.
Well, I think the pattern of the drones is a little bit different in the sense that it has to be either serious malintent or serious incompetence if a drone flies, on its way to the Ukraine, to Finland instead. So, from this particular case, I don't think we can pick up that much, except that this was the first time that we were involved in Article 4 procedures on the Finnish side. I think this was the 8th time that Article 4 has been used in the history of the alliance. So we learned more about that procedure. Then, as far as the eastern sentry is concerned, I think that'll start very much at the southeastern flank of the alliance. So we're talking, Romania, Poland, and then we start moving up through the Baltic states, Finland, and up to the high north in Norway. And this is something that we'll be working on together. So I think we learned procedurally more than we learned in terms of substance.
And how prepared is Finland for this new kind of threat?
Well, prepared enough is my answer, but we can always improve. So, for instance, today, I had a good meeting with our chief of the defense forces and our defense minister, and we also had our security council meeting with the government today. And of course, in every meeting, we discuss Ukraine, and then it always has a different caveat. And today we did talk about drones, and then we also talked about Eastern Sentry. We still have one of the most capable defense forces in Europe, and certainly the largest together with Turkey, Ukraine, and Poland. And I still feel that we have never let down our guard. Does this mean that we have 100% shield on drones? Of course not. Then it's just a question of how you deal with it and how you try to keep ahead of the curve. But I'm in the fortunate position as president and commander-in-chief to have all the key information on security, on intelligence, on military, and on civilian. And as I keep on saying that, I feel very good about the place where we are. But you should never feel too good, because that means that you might take your eye off the ball, get a little bit lazy. So we'll continue to develop, we'll continue to work, and we do that, of course, together with the defense forces and then the government.
That's reassuring to hear. I'd like to take some audience questions here. I believe we have some mics going around. Any hands? Here at the front, the gentleman at the front, please. It's coming on its way.
Good afternoon. I'm Charles Powell, Director of the Elcano Royal Institute in Madrid, Spain. Mr. President, what's your feeling about the debate on the use of Russian frozen assets? Do you think the Commission is being creative enough? Thank you.
Yeah, I think you should probably ask the Commissioner in the next panel. But I have had the opportunity to discuss the issue a few times also with Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. And I think creative is the right word. That's what we need to do. So first of all, I think what G7 came up with on how to use the interests of the frozen assets to back up Ukrainian loans was creative and innovative. But I do think that we need to move a step forward. And we need to get Russia to understand that these frozen assets are never going back. It's going to be about war compensation. It's going to be about different ways in which Ukraine will be using them. And I think what probably needs to happen right now is that there needs to be a little bit of burden sharing, so that we cover the backs of our Belgian friends, that they are not the ones who will be held legally responsible at any particular case. And then we start thinking about, okay, how do we use the frozen assets and for what? Two observations on that. One might think that there would be a slightly more aggressive way of investing that money. Right now, it's just on long-term interest. Perhaps you could get a little bit more leverage out of them. Second, when we start talking about the reconstruction of Europe, how can we use that money in a smart kind of a way? Because that's always going to be a business opportunity also for the United States, for Europe, and for Ukraine. And then how do you use it for war compensation? So I actually think that the Commission has been creative, and it continues to be creative. And remember, the deeper the crisis, the more creative the Commission is, as we could see during the Euro crisis as well.
Great, thank you. I think we have one or two more questions. Here, gentleman in the middle, please.
Thank you. Raffaele Marchetti, Lewis University in Rome. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Where do you see the major obstacles? I mean, what is your feeling about the current negotiation? Is more about territorial issues and more about security guarantees? Is more about financial issues? And if you look forward in 2 years' time, what kinds of reasonable arrangement you may think about? Of course, considering that ultimately it's Ukraine to take a decision, but of course, I mean, you are involved in discussion, so maybe you have a good feeling.
Yeah, the first thing to say is that we should always come back to basics and ask ourselves, what is at stake here? We have an imperial state which has a strategic aim of denying the basic tenets of nationhood of Ukraine, which means the independence of Ukraine, the sovereignty of Ukraine, and the territorial integrity of Ukraine. And that is the strategic aim of Russia, has been from the beginning and continues to be that. I think what we need to try to do is to change the strategic aim of Russia. And then we come to the second observation. I actually think that the issue of territory and security guarantees is intimately linked in the short term and in the long term. And by that I mean to say that I think the deal to be done for a ceasefire is to freeze the line of contact as it stands right now, with providing security guarantees to Ukraine. And then when the negotiations begin, that's a different story. So my suggestion is not, and I stress not, that Ukraine should lose territory, but we probably want to focus the strategic aim of Russia to a point where Russia is only focused on territory. That would be useful from a negotiating perspective. But I can tell you one thing, and that is that Finland will never approve the territorial acquisition of Ukrainian land to Russia, whether it's the Crimean Peninsula or Donetsk or Luhansk. Those decisions are huge decisions, and they can only be made by one country and one government, and that is Ukraine.
Thank you. We had a question here in the middle. I think this gentleman was first.
Thank you. Charlie Slunis, Pasternak, Nordic West office. Mr. President, you have spoken a lot and written about the global south. So I'd like some reflections on your conversations. What do the leaders in India or China or Indonesia think about this? Or in fact, do they really think about this a lot?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question, and you know, my big thesis, of course, right now is that we're witnessing a change in the world order dynamics and balance, which is akin to the end of the Cold War, end of World War II, and end of World War I. And then we have to ask ourselves the question, what do we aim at? I think our aim here in Finland is to still strengthen and hang with the multilateral system of governance of international institutions, rules and norms that were established after World War II. And then we ask how we do that. Well, we do that by giving agency to the global south, which doesn't feel that it has that. The likes of India, Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, Brazil, Argentina, Mexico, et cetera, because if you give agency to a player, then they're more likely to deal with that. Because I don't think anyone will benefit from a transactional world. Transactions take you to a certain place until you hit a wall, and sometimes you end up in a corner from which you really can't get out. So I've had lately conversations with Prime Minister Modi and President Ramaphosa, and the only conversation that we have is basically about the situation in Ukraine. And I do think that it would be good to see them more involved. For instance, President Ramaphosa, who was a good friend of President Martti Ahtisaari and a peace mediator, understands peace. India has a geopolitical stake in this. So we should get them involved in one way or another. The final point that I still want to make, that I think one of the keys to peace, because there are many, is held by China, because China has such a stronghold on Russia at the moment. So I think also, if I take a lesson from Martti Ahtisaari, fully understanding that not everyone can be involved in peace negotiations, but if there was a stake in the peace negotiations from India, from South Africa, for instance, Brazil, and then China, perhaps that could nudge us towards peace.
Thank you, Mr. President. A final question from me. You're heading to New York next week for the UN General Assembly. Where
Tomorrow, actually.
Tomorrow, excellent. Yeah. Where you will meet President Trump. What is your message to him?
Well, I think the UN week is always important. So my first message is that please, the United States, stay engaged in the United Nations, that it's a very useful multilateral fora for settling issues and settling peace. And of course, then, the second message is always going to be about Ukraine. But there, I come from a small country, so we should never inflate our capacity to influence big players. The big players decide. I mean, that's just the reality. So I think, therefore, it's more for me to go and question that, or ask the question from President Trump, okay, what do you think we should do next? And if next means putting more financial pressure on Russia, if next means giving more military aid to Ukraine, if next means stopping Europeans buying oil and gas from Russia, I think we've made advancements. So I think we are looking at an interesting week. I know that the debate will be quite a lot on the Middle East and Palestine and two-state solution. But from a Finnish perspective, I think we should focus a lot on what's going on in Ukraine. And we'll see what the President of the United States does. The final point that I make here is that since President Trump came into office, we have tried every day, every week to find a solution. We're not there yet, but I do believe that the only person who really has the capacity to end this war quickly is President Trump, and anything that moves him in that direction would be of course welcome.
Thank you so much, Mr. President.
Thank you.